Right, okay, welcome to your mark scheme for the experimental methods exam practice. We won't hang around because it's quite a few short questions that fingers crossed you are all fairly confident with. One thing that you will find though is there is some AO2 focus which I'd really like you to take on board so that we can discuss it more in the session. This was the thing across the board that everybody did really poorly on last year, so it is a real focus for me to ensure that you don't fall into the same trap and you can still access the higher grades in a way that maybe some of the students couldn't because they didn't do the AO2, which is apply. So that's really important. You all know, complete the worksheet first, different coloured pen, watch the video, give yourself a mark, make a note. This is really important. Some of you I didn't see why. So this whole exercise is completely pointless unless you mark. Make a note telling me why you didn't get the full marks. And it's not for me, it's not telling me why I didn't get the full marks, it's telling you. And imagine if you could turn back and look and go, oh yeah, this is where I keep losing marks, oh I'll make a difference, I'll change that, and then your grade would improve. So you must put down why you didn't give yourself full marks. It can be dead simple, brief, but please make sure that I can't say, why did you get full marks, and you can't tell me. And then look at the end, is there any pattern? So I had some really, the best students, the ones who reflected most carefully, regardless of whether they got a good grade or not, reflected on what was a consistent mistake that was made. And that's it. So, it's just one reason why the researchers decided to use a field experiment rather than a lab experiment. 1 mark for a brief or muddled answer, 2 marks for accurate elaboration. So what we talk about here, there's 2 skills you would use. This one is, believe it or not, AO3, because it's saying why is field better than lab. So you'd say a strength of a field is, which we've already looked at, which is half the battle, so you're halfway there. So if you talked about a strength of a field experiment, you should be able to get 1 mark. The second mark is for applying it to the stimulus. So it says why the researchers decided to use a field experiment rather than lab experiment. You also need to link it back to the stimulus. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like to quickly glance over the stimulus again, talks about Dave, talks about the train station, and then I'd like you to look at your answer and I would like you to highlight where you've used the words that are related to Dave or whoever it is, train station Dave, whatever words you've used, any words from the stimulus that you've used other than the obvious and, but, if and so on. Highlight those. If you can highlight 1 or more's brilliant, but 1 is more than enough, you can potentially still access the second mark if you've done everything properly. If you can't highlight any, then you don't get any marks and you need to make a note of why. Although if you know a strength, you know you could easily get the second one just by shoving in a word like train station or Dave or photograph. So one of the strengths, participants are less likely to show demand characteristics because the first part of the experiment they were unaware they were taking part, and so are likely to respond more genuinely when trying to pick out Dave's photo. I don't mind what strength you use. We've talked about different strengths. We've talked about for field that it's more natural, which does reduce demand characteristics and so on and so on. I don't mind which strength you use. Just read it, check your notes, make sure you have talked about a strength of field experiments. If you have, then if you've mentioned a strength, which is brilliant, then just check that you've talked about Dave or photographs or whatever it might be. You can access the 2 marks. If you only talked about strength, technically you shouldn't get any because the mark scheme is really clear, but I would let you have 1. Just make sure you write the word context or refer back to the stimulus or make it really clear what you need to do. Okay. Another example, it's set in a real life setting such as a train station, so the research has high validity. So there you go, you've mentioned train station, you mentioned high validity, and then you need to elaborate. So the findings can be generalised to other stimulus situations. Okay, so make sure you've done that. Have you talked about a strength? Have you elaborated a strength is, this is a strength because, have you applied it to the stimulus? If so, you get 2 marks. Well done. Nice easy one. 1 mark for identifying a lab experiment, which fingers crossed you've all done. And then for B, you get 1 mark for a brief or muddled answer and 2 marks for accurate elaboration. And this is the kind of thing you want to look at. So basically 1 mark is for a strength, the second mark is for elaboration, which is this is a strength because. So you get 1 mark if you talk about it being highly controlled, you get a second mark if you explain why being highly controlled is a good thing. So this is a strength because it reduces extraneous variables, increasing validity. Okay. And then hopefully you've talked about, so you get 1 mark if you said whether the list was positive then negative or negative then positive or anything along those lines. Please make sure you've named both conditions. If you haven't, if you've just said the order of the list, might feel generous and give you half 1 because you did identify it correctly, but in the exam half points don't exist. So please mention you've mentioned the order of the list with positive then negative or negative then positive. And dependent variables for the next mark, the number of participants who said Alex was funny or number of friendly responses. So as long as you've mentioned a number, then you should be fine with that one. And then finally, same thing, why did they decide to use a lab experiment rather than a field experiment, and discuss the advantages of carrying out this experiment in a lab. Advantages, so you can only access up to 3 marks if you've included 1, but the way we've done it, point example, you should hopefully have accessed all 4. So a strength is, this is a strength because, another strength is, this is a strength because, or advantages, and that should help you access the full marks. So again, state the strength and elaborate on why it's a strength. So things you could have talked about, a strength is that it's controlled over variables. This is a strength because it allows us to reduce extraneous variables, increasing our confidence in cause and effect, and therefore increasing the internal validity. Another strength is it's easy to replicate, and therefore we can check if it is reliable by looking at the results and seeing if we get similar results. And then ethical issues, participants. So this is one we haven't covered, but it is one that you could talk about. So strength is that if it's in a lab, then it reduces ethical issues. This is a strength because participants know they're taking part. Anyone who studied GCSE psychology before will know that's about talking about informed consent. If you don't panic. We are going to have the joys of ethics later on. Brilliant. Please make sure you have marked it. Please make sure that you have said why you didn't get full marks if you didn't get full marks. 1 or 2 words is more than enough, but just make sure you've made those notes. Brilliant. Thank you very much.